Welcome to Legal Wellbeing in Action, podcast series of the New Mexico Wellbeing Committee. We're here with our September release for the What a Healthy Legal Community Looks Like campaign, and the campaign itself aims to understand the state of well-being in legal organizations, enlist local leaders to help define what well-being looks like for their populace, identify priorities for those communities, measure, evaluate, and improve. So for September, we have trained our eyes on two of New Mexico's bigger and older law firms, Modrell and Rody. We are joined today by speakers from both of these firms to discuss what is unique in the community of the bigger law firms in New Mexico, and what does that mean when we say bigger law firms? And more specifically, how did they focus on well-being in that setting for their attorneys? From here, I'm going to let our guests take it away. To our listeners out there, as always, thank you for tuning in to Legal Wellbeing in Action. If you'd like to leave us some feedback or to continue the conversation on well-being with us, please email us at well@sbnm.org. We hope you enjoy.
Well, thank you, Tanessa, for that introduction, and thank you for having us on Legal Wellbeing in Action. Today's episode is about well-being in the bigger firm, and has the subtitle, Leash the Dog, Secure the Scene. I'm Briggs Cheney, and I'll be the moderator this morning. And I am joined this morning with by Mia Lardy and Angelica Lopez and Seth Sparks. I'm going to have them introduce themselves briefly in a second, and then the plan is that I will kind of introduce this program with a little more detail, a little background, and then we're going to explore some different topics on well-being in the big firm. So with that brief introduction, Angelica, why don't you introduce yourself briefly and tell us who you are and where you work?
Thank you, Briggs. I am an associate attorney at the Rody Law Firm, and I practice primarily in medical malpractice and some products liability and a little bit of just general professional liability cases. And I've been practicing for 3 years. I'm heading into my 4th year now, and I've worked with Rody throughout that time.
Thank you, Angelica. And Mia, I feel like I'm taking a deposition. Tell us who you are and where you work.
Sure. So my name is Mia. I work at Modrell Sperling. I have been there 10 years. Tomorrow will be my 10-year anniversary at Modrell. I clerked for 2 years after graduating from Loyola Chicago School of Law at the New Mexico Supreme Court with Chief Justice Maez at the time, and then was a lateral hire. And I never thought that I would be working at a quote unquote big law firm. I always thought that I would do nonprofit work representing kids and just all various types of proceedings. So my career trajectory is definitely different than what I had originally anticipated. But like I said, I've been at Modrell now for 10 years. And I don't regret a minute of it. I was voted in shareholder in October of 2020, effective 2021, and my practice is litigation. About half my practice is representing various school districts around the state in all different matters, and then the other half is doing medical malpractice insurance defense work.
Great. Well, congratulations, Mia, and thank you. And Seth, you're the guy in our panel today. Tell us about yourself.
Thanks, Briggs. My name is Seth. I'm a partner at the Rody firm, and I've been here since 1996. I also clerked for a federal judge, but I left for 2 years, went to a small firm, and came back early on in my career. And my practice area is primarily transportation law at this point, and a fair bit of legal malpractice defense, professional responsibility kind of stuff.
Thanks, Seth. And with those kind of personal introductions, let me give you all a little bit more of an introduction from me. about this program this morning. If I didn't say it earlier, I'll say it now. A disclaimer, I have never worked with a big firm. Once upon a time, early out in my career, Ken Harrigan suggested to me maybe I should send a resume to the Modro firm, which I did, and then he wrote back and said, or called me, it was before internet, and he said, well, Jim Parker, the now federal Jim Parker, wanted to see my transcript, and so that stopped that process altogether, knowing I would not qualify. But I make the disclaimer because I am not here today to tell anybody listening that I know something about big firms. I do an awful lot of work like Seth in the malpractice area and disciplinary area. I know a fair amount about lawyers and law firms, so I have some understanding. So that's caveat number one. Caveat number two, there is a paper that accompanies this podcast that I wrote. Because I have never worked with a big firm, I probably shouldn't have been the one to be writing it. But it was written to be not necessarily provocative, but maybe to raise some questions. And it allowed me to throw out a personal hypothesis, which, as I've shared with Mia and Angelica and Seth, I'm not sure it's correct, but it also allows me to introduce Tanessa, will introduce this program. And Tanessa is the clinical coordinator at the State Bar for the JLAP program. And I work with her closely. And as I note in the paper, she is a former EMT from San Diego, and she is always telling us about the mantra of EMTs, and that is leash the dog, secure the scene. And as I mentioned in the paper, what does that have to do with big firms? And it leads me to my personal hypothesis, and that is that well-being really is not about big firms or little firms. It's really about personal decisions and being intentional about taking care of yourself. That's a pretty wild theme, and we'll discuss that a little bit. In preparing the paper, I did some investigation and interviewing of folks. That included meeting with Seth and Chuck Vigil at the Rohde firm, who are long friends of mine, and Brian Nichols at the Model firm, likewise an old friend. We discussed the well-being and the well-being in their respective firms and what they're doing. I met with Bill Slees and Tanessa Akins at the State Bar. Many of you may know Bill Slees, the now retired but former Chief Disciplinary Counsel for the State Bar. He now heads up a program at the State Bar, Professional Practices Program, dealing with all issues relating to the practice of law. And he's just, for those of you who know him personally, he just is a wealth of knowledge, a very thoughtful guy, and he had some wonderful ideas. And then last, because I work with her closely, Pam Moore, who is the director of the New Mexico Lawyers, Judges and Lawyers Assistance Program, also working in the area of coaching of lawyers and law firms. I spent some time with her, and so I got some ideas. And I guess lastly, I would say, why have I picked on the Rohde firm and the Module firm? And that probably it'll lead into one of our questions, but it also allows me to explain that. I've practiced law for a while here in New Mexico now. When I started, what we called the big firms, or looked to as the big firms, one was Rohde and one was Modrell. Back in the day, there were some other firms, Kelleher and McLeod, which is still here, but there's a different variation of that firm today. We'll talk about it, but just because Rohde and Modrell have been always two firms I look to. We talked a little bit about this, the four of us, when we prepared for this podcast this morning. We decided I would refer to them as homegrown big law firms, or Vanessa, I think, suggested we call it or refer to it as deeply rooted in New Mexico. And those are true. These are two firms that have been around and go back in New Mexico history, and maybe that's a good place. Seth or Angelica, let me one of you remind us, how far back does Rody go in New Mexico history?
The firm has been in practice since 1883. So obviously I'm not good with math, but that's what, 100, almost 140 years now.
A long time. And I made you look up or chase down the history, or at least the duration of the module firm. Share that with us, please.
Yes, and it looks like, we really started around 1936, so about 86 years.
Oh, okay. So there's some long history there. And the reason I selected both those firms as folks that could help us this morning. So with that kind of introduction and disclaimers and whatnot, and because we just talked about the history of the two firms, let me, and maybe I'll start with you, Seth. And again, this is Briggs Cheney's theory or observation as a lawyer, but it appears to me that in New Mexico, in the last number of years, maybe in part spirited by the decision of the Supreme Court to allow reciprocity, and maybe partly because of the uniform bar exam, I believe the legal landscape of New Mexico is changing. So your thoughts, if you would.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, we've talked about this before, and there are, from my perspective, the true big law that's in New Mexico now is all from out of state, and many of them have a presence here. But I mean, Rodeo modules still persist, and I think are still going pretty strong. So that's all good news for us anyway.
And let me pick on you. As I said a minute ago, I feel like I'm taking people's depositions here. But when you say true big law, how do you distinguish rodeo or module from true big law?
I mean, I was at a conference earlier this summer with basically defense firms, lawyers from defense firms, and 1,000 lawyers, 5,000 lawyers. I mean, I'm not even sure. I'm sure they get much bigger than that. I know they do. Denton's is substantially bigger. So that to me is big law. But for Albuquerque, rodeo module are big law in terms of when I started practicing long after you did. I'm not nowhere near as old as you, but we were really big then, it seemed like. But we're still big law for New Mexico, I think, in reality.
Thank you for recognizing that. I did share with all of them before we got started this morning that when I started, I think I still have the letterhead that I think Rody had 12 or 14 lawyers. So, but that seemed big back then. Mia, do you have a reaction to that? I know you've been practicing now for 10 years, and you had some other ideas in starting out, but what's your view of how do you see it from module's perspective in terms of the changing legal landscape, as I call it?
Sure. So, I mean, same thing, module, we're still going strong. But I think there definitely is that change, and we'll kind of see how we as a homegrown law firm really have to adapt going forward, with, clearly other law firms that are coming in and practicing more in our state. But there is, I think, a lot of value in terms of what firms like Module and Rhodey can offer, and the perspective that we can give, especially as it relates to the whole topic of wellness, just being that homegrown firm. As I mentioned, I went to law school in Chicago, which is a very different landscape, legal landscape and physical landscape from New Mexico for that matter. And so in, keeping up with my friends that are still practicing back in the Midwest in these bigger cities at these bigger law firms, I think there are themes that are just innate in being a law firm based in New Mexico as it relates to the wellness. And I don't know, or the wellness of the attorneys and for the staff of that matter. And I don't know if that has to do with us being, with the mantra, the land of mañana. But I do think overall, even though we are considered the bigger law firms in New Mexico, there is a difference in the way that we practice, at least, again, in my discussions with people from other big law firms. So I do think that we have that perspective to offer.
And that makes a little bit of sense. You're a little more specific than maybe Seth was, where he was distinguishing the really big law firms. But so you would see a difference a little bit between the Rhodeys and Modules and the really big law firms that Seth was kind of chatting with us about.
Yes, absolutely. And again, just in terms of the practice, and I think the experiences that you have as an attorney at a big law, quote unquote, big law firm here in New Mexico compared to a big law firm somewhere else in the country.
And Angelica, I'm going to pick on you next. Yesterday, I had sent all of you an email just because I had experienced something in the course of 2 days before sending it. Before I left the office 2 days ago, I glanced at the most recent bar bulletin, and I think there was this one decision in there that seemed not something I needed to read, and I found myself looking at the classified ads, and I was very surprised, maybe more than surprised. I mean, there was 3 pages of classified ads from law firms looking for lawyers, and that surprised me. And I do know our firm has really struggled with finding new lawyers. So I guess first, and I've got a follow-up question to that, but has that been what you've experienced at Rhodey?
Well, I mean, as a new lawyer, I know that I think part of it is, at least in sort of what I've observed in the time that I've been practicing, is there's changes in the way that people are looking for jobs, and so that could be part of it. I mean, New Mexico tends to be sometimes sort of catching up on that, and so when you're looking for people through classified ads, it's always, I think, difficult. And I think one of the benefits of Rhodey and Module is that there's a lot of word of mouth, referrals you can get from people who you can find in other ways. And I think that's always a way, I think that's always easier to sort of fill those gaps when you're looking for someone to come into the firm, rather than sort of sending out this kind of blast that's impersonal, maybe a bit old-fashioned for newer attorneys, at least. This idea of sending a cover letter and doing all of that, which I think a lot of firms still do, but at least for younger attorneys particularly, I think, it's just kind of an outdated way of being recruited. And so, yeah, I mean, I've got a lot of friends who are practicing and are moving around. I think that's not unusual. Just even with people I've spoken with who've been practicing for longer. But, in my experience at Rhodey, when we're looking for new people, it's sort of a conversation of, hey, who do you know? Who can you recommend? Versus, hey, let's send out a blast and just find kind of who's going to respond to this. And so I'm guessing Module's the same way, where sort of the benefit of having so many attorneys practicing within your firm is that you're bound to have that many more contacts and know of people who would be interested in the work, and so you're not really having to go through that. I mean, that's at least the perspective that I've seen.
And I'm not going to let you off the hook yet. What I wrote you all yesterday is the significance of looking at my bar bulletin the night before and seeing these 3 pages of law firms and lawyers looking for other lawyers to hire. Was the next morning as I was shaving, before I came to work, I was listening to National Public Radio, and they had a feature yesterday morning on what they called quiet quitting. And the thrust of it, or the theme, was that and it was not about law firms or our profession, but just generally about big companies, and the fact that today employees are no longer willing to work for the company or for the better good of the company. They're now deciding that there's something else in life more than just the bottom line of the company. And I'm trying to think what Pam Moore called it. She called it disengagement, included in our email to all of you. So I guess I posed the question to Seth and Mia about the changing landscape of law firms or in New Mexico. Have you seen, and I'm the oldest in this group this morning. You may be the youngest, I don't know. But you've been practicing less than the rest of us. Do you see, or people you talk to, people within your firm, is there a changing of the times for the new lawyer?
I mean, I think what I've seen is sort of, and I don't know how much the quiet quitting applies to the practice of law beyond the fact that I think generally for people who are younger, it's harder to buy into this idea of, hey, I'm gonna give my life to this company forever and then retire, and this is just going to be, that's kind of the way things work. I don't know that people really approach careers that way anymore. It's not like working at Ford Motor Company for 45 years and then you retire with this great retirement package, and that's what everybody kind of did for a long time. And I don't know that that's really how people see their work anymore. To the extent that applies to the legal field, I mean, I think there's something to the fact that, you come in and I think maybe there's a more ownership of your abilities, more ownership of who you are and what you're bringing to a firm that allows you to kind of have this idea of, I'm going to approach this in a way that takes into account my own needs, and that I'm not sort of just driven by giving everything to a firm in this sort of like the abstract, but rather how am I engaging with my work? What am I getting from this firm? How am I being a part of the firm in general, rather than just sort of a cog in the machine? And I think more and more that's what people are driven by. That's certainly what motivates me. And why I think Rody has been, a great fit for me. And so I think the associates that I work with all feel that way. We're all very much, a part of the cases we do. We're able to look at and make decisions about how, case strategy, how these cases are moving forward. And that's a huge piece of feeling like an attorney, very much, at least, in my few years of practicing, that's what makes you feel like a human being and not like a machine. So I would imagine that that's maybe sort of how it could play in, that idea of quiet quitting could play into the legal field.
And I'm going to come back to you. I'm going to give you a heads up so you can think about this. After I'm going to pick on Mia next, and then I'm going to jump on Seth about whether or not the bottom line for big firms is really what drives things. and I'm going to come back to you to see if he's telling us the truth.
I'll be ready.
Okay. And Mia, let me, before we got Angelica's perspective on, are the new prospects, the lawyer prospects, folks coming out of law school, are they different than what they used to be? You're now 10 years out. You're a recently minted shareholder at Module. What are you seeing in terms of the lawyers that are coming out of law school today?
Sure. So I think there were a couple things I was taking notes while Angelica was speaking. So I have maybe not a unique perspective, maybe so, but my husband works in the public sector. And so we've had a lot of discussions in our house after the workday. Then I should also preface this with, I'm currently on the recruiting committee at Module, but the question has been, just what you were saying, Briggs, there's 3 pages of ads in the bar bulletin, and we've been looking to bring on some laterals and all of that. So the question becomes, what is it that we need to do a good job of our recruiting? And one of the things that I just wanted to put out there, because this doesn't relate just to big law firms, small law firms, or even our legal profession, and I'm sure everyone has heard about this since COVID, right? The pandemic kind of created this reset in all career fields and in the job market in general. So I think some of the topics, and especially as they relate to wellness, yes, there are things that are very specific to the legal profession that I think we can address. But then I think the other part of this is beyond the law as to how do people in general really recruit. And one of the things is when they were talking about quiet quitting, is it's this concept of, you're not wanting to stay and put in 15, 20-hour days. Whereas I think in the past, maybe that was deemed as, more acceptable, or what you had to do to work your way up. And I think that concept is just totally out the window, both associates and partners, right? Everyone wants more of a work-life balance. And I think technology has been both helpful and a hindrance to that, especially in the legal field in a lot of ways. So I kind of wanted to put that out there first. And then the other thing as it relates to currently in the job market, I know at least what we've seen at Module over the past couple of years when we've had our classes of associates, summer associates come in, is at least there seems to be a bigger push and a trend. And I don't know enough about legal recruiting if this is just an ebb and flow, but there are a lot of individuals, which is great. I clerked, but that are deciding after law school to go ahead and go down that clerking route, at least initially. And I will say, having clerked, it is a very different work lifestyle than being at a firm. So I'm wondering, and I have no basis for this, but that there's individual attorneys that are going down the clerking path initially, and they're like, well, this offers me a very different work lifestyle than if I were to ever go to, any firm, and especially a large firm. So I just don't know. Again, this is totally anecdotal, but I just don't know if part of the issue is when there's law firms, big or small, that are looking for attorneys right now, if the trend is just that there are attorneys out there that are wanting to do an alternative career or something that is not directly related to the practice of law with clients.
Well, thank you. Now I gave Seth a heads up. So let me just ask you the provocative question, which I think the answer is no, but you can answer it. If I'm wrong, Seth, you can correct me. But in the past, I always looked at big firms and thought it's the bottom line. It's the how much does a lawyer produce? How many dollars in the door does he or she bring in? And if they don't, well, they're not going to. And Angelica is looking towards shareholdership, I'm sure. But I mean, is that the way Rhodey works? I mean, is that what it's about at Rhodey, or are the times changing there?
I think you're partially right. I mean, I don't think practicing law in New Mexico's been like other states and bigger cities where people are billing a lot more hours than we were required to. And by the way, Angelica is a really hard worker, so don't let her make you think she's not kicking butt all the time, because she is. She's really awesome and she works super hard. I mean, the thing about it is, and I think you made this point in a discussion we had, it's a lot of type A personalities, generally speaking, and a lot of the folks, not everybody, want to work hard and do well and are competitive. And so you see that, but not everybody. Other people make their own choices. But I mean, in terms of compensation, I mean, honestly, like it would be in a small firm, right? The more you work, the harder you work. If you're interested in increasing your income, you're going to earn more income if you do those things. That holds true at a firm like Rhodey. And for us, we're not an eat what you kill firm, but nevertheless, those things are important. And so we have to make our own decision as lawyers about, that work-life balance. And I think you've made the point in our conversation so far and previously that I've heard you say, and in your article that I got to read, about it being an inside job. And I think a lot of this is sort of the question, at least for me, as I went through the years of figuring out how important my family is, how important my family time is. And Rhodey doesn't stop you from, and other community activities, organizations we're involved in outside of the firm, or even in the state bar. Rhodey doesn't take a position on any of that and actually encourages pro bono and all that stuff, just like Module does, I'm sure. And so really it's a personal decision on the lawyer's part. But I mean, there are consequences for those decisions, like there would be if you had your own firm. I mean, that part still exists. And I think personally for me, a lot of it's the struggle between that being driven to be successful, whatever that means. And that's an open question as I get older, and doing things that I care about and being with people I care about, and that kind of stuff. Balancing those things out.
Yeah. And let me interject something. When I talked with Chuck and Seth, and when I talked with Brian, in addition to Seth saying Angelica kicks butt, Brian Nichols used the same words about Mia, that she kicks butt too. I did get from the respective older lawyers in both those firms that both Angelica and Mia had the ability to kick butt and also take care of life on life's terms. I'll put it that way. I promise to come back to you, Angelica. Let me just ask you point blank. And Seth and I are older, and I, as much as I believe that people can change, it is, some of us are stuck with some of our old traditions. But are you tied to becoming a shareholder at Rhodey? Do you feel like you have to do that, or is there another part of Angelica's life that's important to you, as important to you as being successful or moving up the ranks at the Rhodey firm?
I think that's an interesting question. I think things have actually changed for me over the 3 years I've been there. I was a little older when I went to law school. I was already 30 years old. And so I had, a career working with the state before. I hadn't had children. And so, I was very motivated and driven by career. And this idea that that was my focus in life. I love my fiance and we're very happy, but he understood and understands now how much it means to me to be able to get that fulfillment from work. Recently that's changed, I think, a bit. I'm pregnant, and so I'm going to be leaving on maternity leave soon, and immediately getting pregnant really sort of shifted my focus at work in terms of, wow, okay, I need to take a step back. I've got to focus on what's going to allow me to sort of relax during my pregnancy and afterwards. It sort of changed my what matters the most to me. And like Seth said, there's, a lot to be said for having the ability to sort of make that decision. And that's a personal choice for everybody. For me, even just for me, that's changed in the last year. And so having that ability to take a step back and know that, hey, this doesn't have to be my biggest motivator, and it isn't anymore. And the reason I know that that's okay as of a choice to make is because of the fact that at Rhody there are people who, since I started have said that, they say, this shouldn't be, you shouldn't be working every weekend. We don't expect you to miss out on life events. We don't expect you to be somebody who's going to be putting the job first. And what that means to different people is going to be a different thing. And so I do feel still very motivated to become a partner eventually. And I'm a competitive person in a lot of ways, but is it sort of the sole focus of my life anymore? Is it sort of something where I feel like if something changes, is it going to ruin my life? No. And I think everybody at Rhody would support that view. There's definitely this, and it's sort of a vibe, I guess, but it's backed by people who I think very truly sort of care about you as a person, beyond what you bring to the firm, care about you. And so that's been, I think, a big draw for me to stay in a lot of ways, and to know that even if things change in terms of where I want to be, how much I want to work, how much I can work, knowing that flexibility is there is crucial.
So that's you have the sense that the firm, your firm, respects this new adventure in your life, and congratulations.
Yes, definitely. I mean, yeah, they've all sort of, I've reached out to several attorneys about, hey, what am I going to do about my workload? Everyone, that's a big part. I think Mia, I'm sure, feels the same way at Module, that a benefit of having so many attorneys is, like you said in the beginning, Briggs, that, you're kind of there for each other. You have each other's backs, and people will step up for you. And knowing that if there's something that comes up in life, you've got to you've got that ability to take a step back when you need to.
Okay. Well, thank you. And Vanessa's just indicated to me that we have 10 minutes. We have to speed up here a little bit. Let me ask you, Mia, I'm going to pick on you, and then Seth, I'm coming after you next. What does Mia do to take care of? You're now a shareholder at Module. Do you have another life? What do you do to what's your what do you care? Do you care about well-being, or is it really you want to be top of the heap at Module?
No. So I wanted to piggyback a little bit in answering this question. First, again, congratulations to Angelica. That's amazing. And if you want to email me, I can definitely, if you need to talk to someone, I have 2 little boys. I have a little boy that's going to turn 5, and a little boy that was born literally the weekend before the pandemic. Oh, so my trajectory at Module, and I think, perhaps us bigger firms get kind of a bad rap. I've been there, again, it's 10 years tomorrow. I was part-time for 4 of those 10 years. I opted to go part-time after Caleb was born, and I remained part-time through my first year of partner. So this is my first year being back full-time after 4 years, which is an adjustment. And that's clearly my choice. So one of the things that, again, same thing, I felt very supported, for what worked for me hours wise. When I was out, I took maternity leave with both of my children. What did that look like? Who was there to kind of take over my cases? So all of those things have allowed me to really dictate how I wanted my career to go. So I actually opted to go up for partner 2 years later than I could have. And that was no one's choice but my own, because I wanted to create a little more flexibility in my job, so that I could feel like I am being more present and available at home, at least when I had super itty bitties. So segueing into what do I do for my well-being? Well, I dictate my schedule, right? And that's one of the joys, I think, of our profession in general, and then clearly dependent upon the employer. And I think that's something that employers, especially again, whether you want to call it that we're still in a pandemic or we're kind of entering into this post-pandemic era, is flexibility in work time. So for me, that looks like getting up and getting an hour of work in the morning while my husband gets the kids ready for daycare. And then I pick work back up. And honestly, clearly being a litigator, we do have those times where we have depots that run all day or all day hearings, but I try really hard to have a hard stop at 4 o'clock so I can go pick my kids up and they're not at daycare until 6 o'clock at night. So my day is sometimes very chopped up and can look very different and perhaps very long for people compared to just coming in and working, 9 to 5. But for me, that is what works best for me and my personality, and also for my family. I feel like I'm still able to give to my family while still doing my best professional job. So I don't, I'm in the thick of having little kids. So my wellness, what I do for myself probably looks a little bit different. It may be going to bed at 9 o'clock as soon as the kids are down. But, and then getting to spend time with them and going to the pool in the summer and taking them to their activities. And that brings me great joy. So.
And Mia, thank you. You give a little credence to my hypothesis that you have to be intentional. And so I said I'd pick on Seth. We're probably gonna run out of time here pretty quick, but you're the old guard, Seth, you and me. What the hell's Seth doing, number one, for his well-being? Or are you two, or are you beyond that? And number two, if you don't take care of Angelica, and if Brian Dickles doesn't take care of Mia, how the hell do you get out of this racket if you aren't keeping these folks happy and content and keep them members of the firm?
Yeah, that's a really important thing, and to keep the continuity of the firm going so that I can retire one day, that would be good. Although you're a horrible example for me because you're never going to retire, it would appear. So, I mean, my son is 21, so I'm an empty nester now. So I think I work more than I used to, and have more time to work, but I still do a number of activities, and have outside organizations I'm involved with, and take classes and do other things and work it around my schedule, and go to Lobo football games and suffer through all the pain that implies, and also Lobo basketball and a lot of stuff like that. So I have those outside activities that I do and that are really important to me. And I think that there are things, as you can tell, I'm probably more of an eater than an exerciser, but nevertheless, do some exercising and other kind of mindfulness exercises, which I've learned over the years are really important to me, to keep me in decent shape, because I have learned the lesson that your thesis, which is I'm responsible for my own well-being, and I can't expect the profession or anyone else or Rody really to even take care of me in that regard. I have to do it, and I want to do it. So I try to do those things that keep me healthy as best I can.
Yeah, I agree. If I can piggyback off Seth just really quickly, I think I agree with what your hypothesis was, Briggs. I think that's the first step, though, is being intentional about it, making a decision like I had to this last year to say, hey, I need to take a look at where I am and what I'm prioritizing. But I think the second piece that Seth and Mia are both talking about is how the firm can help with that. And I think that's sort of a crucial part is, once you make that decision that you want to make different priorities or you want to take better care of yourself, how do you do that? Right. And at a larger firm, I think the benefit and what they bring for associates particularly, or for any of the attorneys, is that those tools and those resources to do that. And that's, mentorship through our firm. That's, making, like Mia talked about, making an effort to bring people together and do fun activities together, because a firm isn't like some monolith machine, it's made up of the people who are there, right? I mean, roadie is roadie, yes, but it's also the attorneys who are there who are making the decision to say what is roadie, and it's those people who make those decisions to say, hey, this is how I want the firm to be. This is what we should be doing to make it better for people. That I think really is that important second piece that helps once you make that intentional decision, how you put that into action.
And that's great. You give me a segue to. I'd feel bad if we didn't interject into this podcast because Brian Nichols was so damn proud of it that the Module firm has had a first-class cornhole contest within their firm, and I understand this morning, in addition, they had foosball, and so somewhere I think a challenge has to go out between Rhodey and Module for at least a cornhole contest and come up with some traveling trophy or something. So that's close to a good place to stop. Let me, as I said to everybody at the beginning, like Seth, I've been around a while. I have found that changing for me really is intentional. And I've done some things. Intentional means to me, I've got to do something. And I have done some things, and I now know that I can change a little bit. But I want to end where I started with Pam's her goal, where she sees well-being, where she sees the JLAP committee in this state is that we need to change the well-being culture in this legal community. And I want to thank all three of you, the two women, the younger lawyers, the up and coming, the new guard. It's encouraging to me to see two lawyers who are willing to say, yeah, I'm going to work hard, but I'm also I'm going to take care of myself. And Angelica, you are soon to learn that even further with the new kid. That's wonderful. And Seth, thank you. Thank you for being like me. We're trying, but I want to thank all three of you. And I want to thank your two firms. I have been around for a while, and they're just two great firms. And thank you for helping us this morning and kind of sharing your thoughts on. We could have gone on for another hour, I think, talking about different things that the firms do and that the firms could do and think about, but maybe another day. So thank you all, and I hope you all go do something intentional for yourselves. Be selfish, as I say, okay?
Thank you for listening. This episode was produced by the State Bar of New Mexico's Wellbeing Committee and the New Mexico Judges and Lawyers Assistance Program. All editing and sound mixing was done by Blue Sky eLearn. Intro music is by Gil Flores. The views of the presenters are that of their own and are not endorsed by the State Bar of New Mexico. The content is not intended to be a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment, or legal advice. Always seek the advice of your physician or other qualified health provider with any questions you may have